Got like 10 seconds left, and then you're famous around the world.
Where it all started.
Give people a second to file in. Hello, everyone. As we go ahead and get started, if you want to go ahead and drop where you're tuning in from in the chat. My name is Manny Corlew, and I just want to thank you all for joining us for Smart Selling with AI, Opportunities in Minefields with Ani Gadaparthi. I'm the community manager here at Consensus, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. DemoFest is presented by Consensus. Consensus is leading the world in the new era of demo automation. Our platform gets your buyers what they need when they need it. It then multiplies your revenue team's impact with unique insights on those buyers. As a result, you'll see faster close times, larger deals, and higher close rates. You can learn more about Consensus at goconsensus.com, or you can view the automated micro demo at the link on the Docs tab on the right of your screen. We encourage you to participate, just like you're dropping in the chat where you're tuning in from. There's a few options for you to engage with us throughout the session. The chat function is going to allow you to engage with us as well as other attendees. Our speaker is going to be taking questions, but if you feel like you're going to lose that question, head over to the QA section and ask your questions at any time. If at any time you're having some technical difficulties, head down to that gear at the bottom of your screen, and you're going to see a help document pop up. That's going to help you troubleshoot some of those common issues you might be facing. And now I want to introduce our speaker. I'm excited to introduce Ani Gadaparthi, the founder and CEO of DealPage, which was previously Baseplate, a YC and venture-backed startup based out of New York. Their team works with startups and enterprises to deploy AI in B2B sales workflows. They have over a decade of AI experience and were featured in Google's I/O during their last launch of Palm 2 models. He has worked also as a TA and an undergrad researcher at UC Berkeley and as a product manager for AI augmented video meetings at Logitech. And now with that, I'm going to turn over the rest of the time to you, Ani. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Manny. Hey, everyone. Really happy to see all you guys here. Let me just get started with sharing my screen. Cool. So as Manny mentioned, my name is Ani. I'm one of the founders and the CEO of DealPage. We are based out of New York, and we are building the first AI sales engineer. That is not the point of this session. The team and I have basically spent the last few years building a bunch of different types of AI applications, specifically with language models. And we've also spoken to probably hundreds of teams at this point at varying stages of their understanding of AI and their kind of preparedness for this kind of new way of working that AI is bringing to us. I will say, in complete honesty, most teams are towards the not understanding end of the spectrum. And that can have some, I think, negative impacts. I think the first thing we see is a lot of teams kind of sitting on their hands and kind of waiting because they're not really sure what to do. And there are also teams that are making poor investments in the types of like tools and infrastructure that they're buying. So what I want to talk about today is how you can avoid either of those situations. And hopefully by the end of the presentation, you come away with a deeper understanding of how these AI tools work, what the models are good at and what they're bad at, as well as what like researchers and product teams like ours are doing to make AI products that work really well for you. I think this is really important right now. I know AI is top of mind for a lot of us. And essentially every company is now an AI company. There's hundreds of new startups like ours, you know, old kind of legacy products are rebranding as AI or launching AI features. And a lot of us have very cool demos. We can all paint a really good vision of like what AI might be able to do for us in a couple of years. But like very tactically, it's important to know how these tools work and what they can do well for you right now. And that's really going to be the goal of this presentation. Hopefully it's helpful. If you guys have any questions throughout, just let me know. Sorry, struggling to click through. So as a quick agenda, I'm going to start first with just like a brief introduction with a real world example. And then I'm going to jump into three of the most common kind of categories of AI tools. The first one is going to be AI for writing. You've probably seen a bunch of tools for like writing blog posts or even like emails and things like that in the sales context. Second, I'm going to talk about fact finding, which is really like chatbots and question answering and these types of tools. The last one is going to be AI workflows, which is pretty broad in general, but a really important kind of use case to talk about. I'm going to briefly talk about the cost of inaction when it comes to AI, and then hopefully leave you with a very like concrete tactical framework when it comes to evaluating different use cases for AI and different vendors. And then we'll kind of wrap up and have some time for QA at the end. So to start things off, I actually want to draw a parallel to human emotion and our perception of human emotion from people's facial expressions. I know it's probably pretty easy when you're looking at the screen right now. You have still pictures of this person's face. You have, the actual like micro expressions listed out on the right. But I want you to imagine experiencing a friend or a colleague having some emotions and how quickly you can kind of perceive that. When it's happening live, it's even more impressive. Our micro expressions happen in like 50 milliseconds and they might go away. They're pretty fleeting, but our brains can process and kind of categorize emotions without us having to do any actual thinking as kind of automatic. And that really happens because our brains have been trained over a really long time to pick up on this. Now, as a kind of parallel to AI, if there was an AI robot or an AI avatar trying to experience some emotions, it might be close. But it would most likely fall into something we call the uncanny valley, which is like it's close, but there's something a little bit off that doesn't feel very human to us. The reason I wanted to start with this example is I think there's a pretty clear parallel between this and AI generated writing. AI avatars trying to have expressions and AI kind of writing blog posts or emails and things like that for us. I think for a lot of us, and I don't know if this is true for everybody, but as we use AI tools more, it's becoming more and more clear when something is written by AI, and it might fall into that a little bit of that uncanny valley. So to, I guess, tie that specifically to this presentation, does anyone here know if the presentation title is written by AI or written by a human? I'm curious if you guys want to post it in the chat, feel free to. I won't do an actual poll, but yeah, spoiler alert. This was an AI generated presentation title. I'm sure some of you could pick up on that. And I don't know your take on that. Like, did you think if it was a good title or bad title, boring, not boring? I personally don't think it's the best title, but I couldn't think of anything better. So I asked ChatGPT. And I think that's kind of a scenario a lot of us are in when we're writing an email or, writing an article or something like that. So to kind of broaden it out a little bit, kind of taking the example of human expressions and what makes it not seem real, what makes writing sound like AI? Similar to if you were trying to explain why someone's face makes them look sad or excited, it's kind of hard to put into words, but I thought this example might make it a little bit more clear. This is a tweet from Paul Graham, also known as PG. He's a really famous venture capitalist and the founder of Y Combinator, a program that we went through. He got into a really heated Twitter interaction with a bunch of people after this tweet, where he basically says there are certain words that flag to him, at least in his mental model, that something was written by AI. And not only is he starting to recognize it, but he's having a negative reaction to it. In this case, he's not responding to that cold email. And PG actually has the numbers to back it up. With specific words like delve, if you just look at the frequency of those words in online content or academic papers and things like that, right when ChatGPT starts coming out in 2023, you see a huge spike. And I'm going to venture a guess, if we did the same analysis with a bunch of other words, you'd see something extremely similar. So really, what makes something sound AI? It might be specific words. It might be phrases or sentence structures. It might be the tone or like lack of emotion. All of these things kind of come together to build our mental model of what is AI generated and what's written by a human. So to kind of tie this together with some statistics, there was an MIT study conducted on human-generated writing versus AI-generated writing. And I think the top-level headline was something like, we're not very good at detecting AI-generated writing. But I think if you dive a little bit deeper into the numbers, there's a much more interesting story. And you kind of start to see it when you break things up by age category. When you look at younger cohorts in this study, they were significantly better at detecting the AI generated writing, and the rate of that was actually increasing over time. And I think that what that tells us is as people use tools like ChatGPT more often, like younger folks tend to do, you get better at recognizing the style that they write in. You start to get an intuitive sense for what's written by a human versus by a model. And again, just detecting something as AI is not necessarily a bad thing if people react positively to it. But like Paul Graham, in that situation, there is a significant human bias detected in these types of evaluations, where once you know that something's AI generated, even if the quality is like good, you're going to rate it much lower. To take this one step further and talk about like some of the business impact here, let's take a look at an example of SEO. A company called Hotjar ran an experiment where they gave a kind of content brief to a human copywriter and to an AI like ChatGPT, produced 2 blog posts that met the same kind of quality bar, and published both. On both sets of like the key SEO metrics that you want to track, like the number of clicks and the amount of time spent reading, which you can see on the chart on the left and the kind of heat map on the right, you can see that the human generated article, the human written article, performed way better. So I guess to kind of wrap this all together, what is my point here? I think people are going to start getting better at detecting human generated writing. I think people have a bias against AI generated writing, and that bias can lead to pretty significant impacts to your business, whether it's a cold email in your outbound campaigns, whether it's your SEO, whether it's your prospect communications during the sales cycle. Now, why is this important to talk about today? There's actually 2 things. So like one, multiple agencies have estimated that like ungodly amounts of content online are going to be AI generated in just a few years. So it's something to at least think about strategically. Like, are we going to be in that 90% or are we going to invest in being that 10%? I think the other reason this is really important is that copywriting and these like blog posts and email writing tools were really the very first like marketable and sellable enterprise solutions when it came to AI. If you guys remember companies like Jasper, or Copy AI, or Writer, these companies like in the early days of the like AI wave, grew to huge valuations. And at the surface level, I completely understand why. Like, writing takes a long time. It's expensive to pay copywriters. We want to generate more content and move up in SEO. But like the point of this presentation is if you dig a little bit deeper into how the models work and what they're good at versus what they're bad at, I think you're on a better foundation to properly evaluate this use case versus another one, or this tool versus another one. And I wanted to start with copywriting for that reason, which is it is a really common and kind of no-brainer type use case that a lot of people come to AI with. But if you go one layer under, you might find that that's not really the best idea. So let's dive a little bit deeper into copywriting. This is kind of the second section of the presentation, where I want to go a little bit deeper into the technical kind of strength, like weaknesses of these AI models, as well as talk about the core kind of technical concepts that you need to know going into this new world as you're evaluating AI tools. Under the hood, I mentioned this in the beginning, but researchers and product teams like ours do a lot of work around the model to overcome these weaknesses. But it's important to know what we're doing so you can evaluate how well we're doing it, essentially. When it comes to copywriting, again, core use case when it comes to AI, use cases for you all might be email writing, blog posts, and other online content, social media posts, maybe documentation and things of that nature. So what is the main kind of minefield that we're talking about? We're talking about boring, generic sounding AI writing. If you give ChatGPT a simple kind of prompt like, hey, write some subject lines for me to use in a cold email campaign, they're going to sound extremely generic and boring. And I think one kind of, important failure of these models is that they don't understand like the meta strategy when it comes to any of the tasks you're giving it. So specifically with cold emails, I don't think any of you would have your SDRs or email campaigns use these types of subject lines because they're too generic. They're not really matching up with the current kind of best practices when it comes to writing cold emails, right? So it's similar when it comes to blog posts and all these other things. I don't want to rehash this over and over again, but AI is just not the best at writing unique, interesting, emotional copy. So what can we do as product teams or as buyers of software solutions to make sure that our AI writing isn't super boring? How do we not fall into this trap? The first technique I want to talk about is called fine tuning. Fine tuning is essentially the process of taking a core language model like a GPT-4, providing specialized data sets to kind of fine tune the model and create more specialized models that will be a little bit more unique to your use case. Fine tuning, I won't go super deep into the like technical details, but it essentially involves collecting a bunch of data, running basically GPUs to retrain parts of the model, not the whole model, like the reasoning parts of it, but those final output layers that are going to impact the like tone of voice and the writing style and things like that. When it comes to fine tuning, there's the types of data that you collect might look something like this. You might need 100 kind of examples. You might need 10,000 examples. It really depends on the task. But what you're doing is essentially providing the model with an end-to-end representation of the task that it's doing with a high quality output. You can probably imagine how hard this is to do if you're not like building software to do it. You know, trying to do this for your own team is going to be really tough because usually you're not just fine-tuning a model for chat interactions, you're fine-tuning a model for writing a good blog post or writing a good email given context from other sources, right? Like a LinkedIn profile or some information from your documentation. And what you would have to do to fine-tune a model in those scenarios is collect end-to-end examples with all of the steps in the workflow and a high-quality human output. Collecting those examples is a lot tougher than teams kind of recognize. But if you do it right, a fine-tuned model can sound much less generic. It can match your branding and like the tone of voice you want. And you can potentially create AI-generated content that is that doesn't fall into that minefield of being super boring and generic. So some considerations when it comes to thinking about writing tools and even the writing tools that are fine-tuned either for your business or more generally for a specific use case. The first consideration is that regardless of fine-tuning, human writers still do perform better in almost all cases. Second consideration here is if you're considering fine-tuning something yourself, it is difficult. Like technically, it is expensive, you know, in terms of the cost of hosting models and actually training them. And it's an ongoing process. Like you need to have infrastructure in place for monitoring things, updating data sets and things like that. What it means tactically for you all as potential buyers of software solution is one, you should be thinking about if you're buying something for copywriting, are these models fine-tuned? Do they have the capability of being fine-tuned for our particular use cases? If they don't, are there other ways that you're able to provide explicit examples to the model that it can follow? If you're using like a generic tool that's, you know, doesn't involve examples from your team, like good examples, the outputs are going to fall into that minefield of being generic sounding, and you really don't want to do that. The last one, and this is maybe a little more future looking, is considering the impacts when it comes to SEO. And I don't know if this is a real term or not, I kind of just made it up, but AIO, which would be like AI, basically like your search rankings when it comes to like AI tools like Perplexity and Google's Bard. Like how is your content and the stuff you're putting online going to be indexed in the future in this world where 90% of content is AI generated? You don't want to be the generic stuff. You don't want to be marked as spam by Google or these other search engines. So I think it's very important to think about this from a more tactical sense and not just, oh, I can save some time and create a bunch more blog posts and social media posts. Like it's unfortunately not that simple. So I'll pause really quickly here before jumping into the second use case. If there are any questions, feel free to put them into the chat. I will try to get them at least at the end of the session. But if there's anything top of mind, just toss it into the chat now. All right, taking a deep breath and then going into the second use case. This is a super broad but super important category of AI tools for question answering. So these are going to be like the support chatbots that can answer questions about your products and things like that. Internal tools for like navigating various tools. They might even help you answer questions about your accounts and pipeline and things like that. Question answering, essentially, can we have ask an AI a question and have it get the answer for us in the format that we requested. Super useful, super important category of AI tools. I just want to dive a little bit deeper into them so you might understand a little bit better how they're working. So the main minefield that we are trying to avoid when it comes to these types of chatbots is hallucination. And this is kind of an AI buzzword, so you probably heard it before. It's what scares a lot of teams from investing into AI. What you really don't want to do is ask the AI to do stuff and have it confidently give you the wrong answer, which unfortunately is how some tools will behave if they're not built correctly. In this case, you might ask, give a model a question like, hey, can you write an email for me that is explaining how DealPage can help companies. If it doesn't have information about DealPage, it's going to make something up, and that could land you in a host of trouble. One thing I want to call out here, and this is more broad and general than this particular use case, but I want to kind of call out that at all of the teams we talk to, even if they're not explicitly like as a company investing in AI tools, their employees are using ChatGPT or Claude or one of these other AI tools on their own to help them with their work. I think it's important to call out here because even if you are like, hey, we're not at a stage to invest in AI tools, your employees are probably using it, and you just want to be aware that some of the content that's coming through or the outputs from whatever workflows you guys have might have some of these hallucinations in them. I see a question in the chat. Do all AI tools hallucinate? No, they don't all hallucinate. And that's kind of what I'm going to jump into next. Like hallucination is a problem, but there's definitely a solution to it that the really good AI products will have thought about. The main strategy for preventing hallucinations is called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. Now, there's 100 different ways to do this, so I'm not going to go into all of the nuances, but this is probably, in my opinion, the most important technique when it comes to any AI tool. And it's essentially going to be how we give the model real-time, accurate information so that it doesn't hallucinate. See, how models give you answers when you ask them a question without any context is it's going to try and remember stuff from its training data. These language models are trained on billions of documents from across the web. And these documents are used to teach the model to reason about whatever questions you might ask them. And sometimes they're really good at remembering content from their data, from their training data, but their recall over that isn't perfect. They remember like a transformation of that content. So that's really what causes hallucinations sometimes. And the models usually don't know if they're hallucinating. What we do with RAG is we're essentially going to take a question, and instead of asking the model to kind of like remember stuff from its training data, we're going to provide it the information it needs at the time the user asks the question to give us an accurate response. And very simply, how RAG works is we take the user's question, we encode what we call like a embedding vector, or just a vector that encodes some of the semantics of the user question. What language models are really good at doing is taking a question like, how do we protect end user PII, kind of understanding the meaning behind this question and including kind of related terms into that query. So the user might ask this question with PII. When we pass this through a language model to create a vector, the vector encodes a bunch of related concepts like data, PHI, privacy, addresses, names, credit cards, all that kind of stuff. And what that allows us to do is create much more expansive kind of search results that we can then pass back into the model. If you compare this to like a keyword-based search type tool, asking this question might not give you the same quality of results that a kind of RAG-powered tool would do. So end to end, the process looks like creating a vector out of a user query, querying a data store that already has pre-computed vectors in it to find information, fetching the relevant information, and then giving it back to the model to help it answer your question. A really important call out here is that creating vectors and storing them is not super simple. It's something that teams have to invest in ahead of time and make sure that those embeddings exist already at the time that users are able to or trying to ask questions and complete whatever task. So in the concrete example of a support chatbot, you might have your support documentation embedded, passed through these embedding models and stored in a vector database. And when a user asks a question, our AI is going to find the relevant content in that vector database and use specific sources to help it answer a user's question. Of course, this is a very simple version of RAG, and teams like ours, we train our own embedding models, they're re-ranking models and query rewriting models. There's a whole bunch of other additional complexity involved in this, but at a simple level, this is how tools kind of prevent hallucination. A couple considerations as you guys are potentially using or evaluating tools for different fact-finding tasks. One is I would highly recommend only using tools that expose citations and confidence levels to the user. This is going to be a really good way of, one, just making sure that answers are correct, but also giving you an intuition for how good these retrieval pipelines are at the vendor that you're using. We've seen huge variety in the type and the quality levels of these RAG pipelines. And the best way I think to evaluate it is test it, see the types of citations and confidence levels that they're getting, and that'll give you a good intuition of how well these pipelines are built. The second consideration here, making sure that these vector databases or store, like basically areas which you can search from, are integrated well and synced well with your data sources, whether it's like Notion or Google Drive or Slack or what have you. You want to make sure that things like permissions are synced over, make sure that the information is up to date. These kinds of syncs and things like that really become helpful when you're in like a B2B context when stuff is changing all the time. The maybe last couple considerations I'll speed through a little bit, but these embedding models and retrieval pipelines are very domain specific. Like models are, if you're a healthcare company, a model might not do as well finding the right context for you as if you're like a marketing company. So if you're in a specific domain where there's a lot of terminology and stuff that's important, it's important to evaluate tools on your domain and not just buy into whatever the vendor is telling you that their models can do. And models are getting a lot better at this. Generally, but they should be able to say, I don't know, if they don't have the context. A lot of tools now are being trained with RAG in mind. So the models, if they don't receive a source that makes sense, they should be able to tell you, I don't know. That's a very important thing to test out. Cool. So I'm now going to jump into the third workflow, third use case, which is workflows. Now, workflows it's a very broad term. There's a bunch of different types of tools to help with workflows, but more generally, our goals with any workflows, not just AI ones, is to automate some kind of really complex or expensive or laborious human task. And they're usually going to be multi-step. We want to enable models in the AI use case to take specialized action, either calling an external API, executing some code, writing some code, specific functions at different steps of this AI workflow. And lastly, we want to make sure that no unwanted actions are being taken. I could give you some examples of AI workflows, but they vary a ton from industry to industry. Some might be back office, like processing patient intake, or it could be RFP responses or something like that. So what are some of the weaknesses of AI models to watch for in any of these workflow tools? Is one, any task where the model has to do something quantitative and kind of reason through a math problem. It might be something like calculating pricing in this simple example. The main minefield here to watch out for is it's kind of similar to hallucinations, but the models make some kind of simple reasoning mistakes, or they might miss a logical step or misadd or mismultiply a number, and you won't really have any idea because it looks very right when you just look at it at a high level. In this case, there was a pretty hidden error about not multiplying out a monthly cost. Again, this kind of goes back to the nature of these models. They are not trained on quantitative reasoning for the most part. They are trained on textual data. So they're probably really good at common math problems that they've seen a lot of times. But if you're asking, but some slightly different numbers that might struggle a little bit because they're not like calculators in that sense. The second category of kind of minefields is like more unsupervised agents. I don't know if you guys have seen like demos for Devin or any of these other kind of like software engineering agents, but essentially the idea is you give an agent a very simple task. The agent has access to a bunch of different tools. It might be able to search through your CRM. It might be able to search through a code base and make some changes to a file, push a commit. The idea with AI software, agents is you give the AI a ticket or like a support request, and the model can kind of do the end-to-end task by itself. And the demos, when it goes right, are actually spectacular. And there was a bunch of hype and buzz around some of these tools just a few weeks ago. I think something to watch out for is like, how well do these generalize across a set of tasks? This is also another good point about setting benchmarks. Luckily, I think the AI industry has been better recently about establishing like very clear cut kind of like evaluations for tools like this. SWE bench is the one that the numbers here are for. It's basically a giant data set of like kind of like tickets and code bases that models need to be able to make the right basically fixes to end to end. And you'll see that the actual accuracy of these is still extremely low. Like you wouldn't really accept that from any other tools. Again, demos look amazing, but dig a little bit deeper and you might, within your own kind of use cases and domain, and you might see something a little bit different. So it's important to be wary of that. So to give you kind of a little bit of a technical explanation of how these tools work, it's usually called tool calling or function calling. Essentially, it's the process of providing models with tools beforehand that they're able to use in different scenarios. So I might give one tool for writing code. I might give another tool that explains how to execute code. Another tool might be my Salesforce API or Gmail API or GitHub API, in this particular case. And essentially what happens when you give a AI agent like a task is the model is determining what tools do I want to call in what order and what parameters do I want to give each tool, like think of it as an API call. And then the model is basically going to go through and execute that task. If you test any of these agents out on your own use cases, you will like pretty quickly see like if they're not supervised, they're going to go way off track and do things wrong, which honestly will take you more time to fix than they would save. So what can we do to overcome this limitation? I think the main thing we want to talk about is like software interfaces here and the process of human review. AI workflows can be extremely powerful and very like provide huge time savings and things like that for you as a person and an employee. But any tool needs to have really intuitive software interfaces where you can intervene at both the planning stage, where the AI is kind of figuring out how it wants to approach this task, and at the intermediate stages, as well as the output stage. These models are going to do a lot of the busy work for you, but your role as a human needs to be well integrated into the workflow to like review things and approve things and edit things. So as you guys, are looking at tools that are promising very cool workflows, just think about like, what interfaces do I need? Like when do I want to intervene? And when do I want to provide my input to the model? Because a lot of times, the more complex the workflow gets, models aren't going to do as well as just like completing the thing end to end, as some of the demos might make it look like. Cool. So some considerations specifically when it comes to workflow tools. One, I would not invest in unsupervised agents, especially now when the technology I don't think is there. And especially I wouldn't invest in any workflow tools that do anything external facing, like something that might like send an email for you or I don't know, post something on your social media for you. Those kinds of things can get a little bit tricky and can have larger consequences than if it's just an internal thing. The software interfaces are still super important. Like we love the chat-based kind of natural language interface for AI, but the interface for kind of intervening in the workflow is very important. Like it needs to be intuitive. It still needs to have like have a nice UI essentially for you as a user to go in. Another thing when it comes to workflows is like this is a smaller point, so I wouldn't read too much into it, but it's very difficult to handle follow-ups. especially in a chat-based format. Like it's much easier to do in an interface versus like trying to chat with the model and get it to edit its plan or redo its workflow. This is a big limitation we see in a lot of existing tools, which is it might handle an initial input okay, and then when you ask another follow-up, which is kind of the natural mode of interaction, the models will kind of implode. So something to test out as you're evaluating tools. Okay, so that kind of ends my like little AI 101 section about a few different use cases. I think most tools that people are looking at when it comes to AI will fall into one of these categories. But if there are other ones, I think they will all be using very similar techniques as far as the AI components go. So knowing those few, fine-tuning, RAG, and agents will take you a long way and help you understand what's going on under the hood when these guys are showing me this amazing demo. It's usually going to be some combination of these. And kind of knowing what to look out for, I hope is helpful for you all as you're trying to dig a little bit deeper and see exactly what's happening. In this next section, I want to talk very briefly about the cost of inaction. I think, obviously you can see these limitations and hopefully I didn't scare you too much, but there are limitations to these models. I think the good products overcome them with those techniques that I just mentioned. Something I see a lot when I talk to customers and prospective buyers is there's a little bit of a hesitant like nature to things where people are more comfortable, I think, waiting and like going with no decision versus taking like concrete action. And I really do think this is one of the biggest failure modes right now and could have pretty big impacts on your teams going forward. I want to talk about a few, and obviously this depends on the team, so don't take it at face value. But teams that do nothing right now when the best teams are investing so heavily in their AI infrastructure are going to fall behind simply. One, your team is going to see less output than your competitors, and with less time and the same amount of work, you're going to see decreased quality. If you can enable your employees with AI, you're going to see improvements in the amount of output, but also the quality, because they're going to spend more time reviewing things versus just getting first drafts out there. You're also going to have weak AI muscles. And this might be honestly the most important one here. You do need to learn how to use AI. You need to learn what AI can do for you. It's not always super obvious. Some of the simple use cases like that you are all using ChatGPT for right now might be obvious, but there's much more you can do with these models that are a little bit less obvious. And it takes understanding the technology to do that. And the second component of your AI muscle is going to be your AI infrastructure. This is going to be like, what tools do you guys have in-house? What tools have you invested in? Because if you sit on your hands now and you're not really doing anything, like when the tools get really good and your competitors are, light years ahead on their AI infrastructure, it's going to be really hard to catch up. And create your vector databases and find the right embedding models and connect all your tools into it and plug it into Slack and your other tools. Like you need to start investing in that infrastructure now, essentially. You're going to have less efficient capital structures. When you're going to get your next funding round or you're going through a budget review, your budget's going to be bloated if you're not using AI tools. This is like fast, essentially free, scalable intelligence. It's going to make your competitors more efficient. It could make you more efficient, but if you're not investing in it now, there might be some hard times ahead. And lastly, this is maybe more on the human element of things, but places to work that have good AI tooling that make it easy to do the job are going to become more attractive places to work, both on the result side of things, but also just like day to day, how fun is it to do my job? How much can I do? The teams with the best AI tooling will be ahead here. So what can you start doing now? The first big thing that I hope everyone takes away from this is investing in AI accessibility. What I mean by this is start exposing your tools, your knowledge, and your interfaces to AI. The world and software tools that have been built over the last 20 years were not built for AI to access automatically or on its own. So there is work involved in connecting your Google Drive or your documentation or your landing page or whatever you need to plug into an AI system so it can start doing work for you. So starting to invest in this infrastructure now, this AI accessibility, as we call it, is, I think, super important. Start thinking about how can I create that vector database or that set of embeddings where my employees or teammates can start getting answers from. How can I plug my CRM and my email and my meeting notes into our AI stack so I can get all my work done very quickly? What interfaces do I need? Like, do I want to talk to it in Slack? Do I want to let my teammates talk to it in Slack? Maybe it's in the browser, maybe it's in Teams or some other tool. I think these are all like areas of investment that the earlier you get started, the more of an advantage you will have. The next area is going to be on training your team. I think hopefully presentations like this help a little bit, but you do have to go a little bit deeper, I think, and broader to get people familiar with AI. We talk to so many users that have no idea what these models can do or how to use them, how to write a prompt, how to provide a model with context, and it's going to be super, super important going forward. So teach your team how these tools work, teach your teams about the capabilities of AI, and learn how to kind of evaluate and get some buy-in for these different tools that you're thinking about. So last section, I want to talk or be more specific about evaluating AI vendors. We do have like a very specific like checklist that we provide to our buyers as they're going through the evaluation process, which I'm happy to share with anyone if you reach out after the call. This is kind of like a summarized version of some of it. So the highest level kind of first order task is deciding what use cases are worth automating. I found a really good chart in a report Consensus put out from about pre-sales activities. And I think it's a really beautiful way of visualizing this. Like on the left-hand side, you have the tasks in your day-to-day kind of ranked by the amount of time spent. And then on the right, you have the perceived impact, like how important is this work? And what you can really easily kind of measure is the misalignment, essentially, in like how you're allocating your time and your resources. I think this is a great way for teams to start understanding like, hey, what use cases should I be looking for AI solutions to? Because AI can help decrease the time on the left. It can, on the left-hand side, if you're spending too much time, it can help you do the things on the right that are ranked highly in less time as well. So it can be a two-sided solution there. So first thing you should be doing is thinking about like, how much time am I spending on different tasks as a team? Think about the importance, like what is the actual ROI on these tasks, like having a human do these and like, get their hands dirty with it. Once you understand the misalignment between those two factors, then kind of kick off your kind of research for a solution. I would also start thinking about the categories of impact. In the sales context, I think it's always about impact on the buyer, impact on the seller. How is the AI tool going to either help me provide better information to my buyers and customers? How it's going to impact their sales cycle lengths? How's it going to impact their perception of us? On the seller side, it's important to think about what new skills does this give my employees if they have this super powerful assistant with them? How much more capacity, like workload capacity, essentially, does that give them? Does having an AI tool help each sales engineer support 6 accounts instead of 3? Like potentially, I think that's an important category of impact. And then the satisfaction. This is like how happy are people doing the work? I think in our particular case, like everyone hates doing security questionnaires and RFPs. No one's happy when they have a bunch of grunt work to do there. So it's a really like core case for automation, right? So there's some sample categories of impact, and this definitely differs from team to team and use case to use case. But I think it's important to write these down and think about like what types of impacts do we want to watch out for when we're deploying the solution. Now, on the technical due diligence side, obviously this is a super simplified list, and we have a more detailed one that we're happy to share. But at a very high level, what I want to impart on you guys is like, one, don't trust blindly at least your vendors' evaluations. If we have an internal test data set, and we train our model to do really good on it, that doesn't always generalize. And that's something I've seen a lot with AI tools is we have really good numbers on our defined test cases, but that doesn't match up with the real world. So as a buyer, what I always tell our prospective buyers is like specifically list out your test cases in a spreadsheet, like example, user inputs, Collect these from your teammates as well. Like, don't just make it yourself. Like, make this an exercise of like, hey, like, what types of inputs are we putting into whatever workflow? What types of questions are you guys asking generally? Collecting high quality human examples is also super important. You need to do that A/B test of like, am I happy with this quality? And collecting those human examples will help you a lot as you're going through any evaluation. And then measure, have some way of quantifying either the time savings or the impacts or the quality. Those are going to be really helpful when you're comparing vendors, when a lot of the underlying models might be similar, but the techniques around them that I talked about in the like first or second section, that's where a lot of the quality differences are going to come between your vendors. And having some very specific metrics will be helpful, because they might say they do the same thing. In reality, that's not really the case. And lastly, when it comes to POCs and demo evaluations, make sure you're asking for these. Self-serve tools, obviously, if it's cheap and easy to get started, give it a try as much as you can. But for the more complex ones, like, you want to ask for, trainings. You want to make sure that the thought process that the AI is taking when it's completing any workflow is kind of matching your workflow. Make sure that you're diving deeper. Think about each individual step, compare it to the steps the AI is taking, and then see what's missing. Is there like a source of context that the tool is not pulling in that we need? Is there a particular human review step that's missing that we need? Those are all going to be very, I think, useful questions to ask as you're talking to vendors. So to wrap things up, just a few takeaways here. One, I would beware AI generated marketing and sales content. I know it was the kind of first cool use case when it comes to B2B applications for AI, but just think about it. I think there are some warning flags that it might be filtered out of search engines, and even our mental models. We might just implicitly start ignoring stuff that we flag as AI generated. The second takeaway, and I think this is very important, start investing now, start training your team, and start investing in the right infrastructure that starts connecting your interfaces and your tools to AI. This is going to be a huge unlock in the next few years. Tools are going to keep getting better, but if you don't have this infrastructure, you'll have a limited way to interact with it. And lastly, use a framework when you're evaluating vendors. Like, pick the best use cases instead of just the easiest use cases. Figure out what you want to automate and why, and then use a kind of data-driven approach when you're evaluating these tools, because the demos seem very magical on their domain and their test cases, but yours often will look very different. And yeah, I think that is pretty much it. I wanted to just wrap up by putting an offer out there for anyone to connect with me. If this is a topic of interest for you, you want to talk about your AI strategy and how to get everyone on your team up to speed. If you want a due diligence kind of checklist, one that we share with our buyers, feel free to ask via email or LinkedIn, and I'm happy to share that. We also have a newsletter which you can find at dealpage.ai/blog. Yeah, I think that's about it. Let's start. I don't know if Manny is still in here, but maybe we can start going through some questions.
I'm always here. I got your back.
Cool.
There was a question asked earlier. Many companies are hesitant to adopt as they're afraid of security implications. Would you be willing to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I think, security is definitely a huge topic. I'm happy to dive a little bit deeper into what exactly the security concerns are, because I think it depends a lot based on the tools and data sources that are connected to these models. There's a few things I want to call out. One is, much like when cloud software started becoming a thing, everyone was really worried about hey, do I want to host my application on AWS or my database on AWS? Now it's kind of become a lot more normalized because we understand a little bit more how they work. I think it's going to be a very similar thing with AI. Most models, I think, in fact, all publicly hosted models have very strict guarantees about how they're using your data, especially if it's via API. And most of your vendors will have very strict kind of MSAs or data processing agreements with vendors like OpenAI or Anthropic or Microsoft or whoever they're doing business with. To take it one step further, I think the best AI companies have their own models that are, fine-tuned or specialized for a use case, and those will sit within their own servers. So if you trust the vendor or you're able to get them to help you self-host something within your cloud, I think that's a good use case for it. Another thing to call out here is just giving inputs to a model does not train the model. There is a training and a fine-tuning phase for models, and then those models are deployed. So unless those model inputs and outputs are being fed back into a training process, your IP should not be leaking. And I think most good vendors will be able to explain exactly like how your data is being used. And if they're not doing that, just don't go with them. It's a big red flag.
Thank you for that. Sasha wants to know, what is your process for writing a blog? Do you brainstorm with AI or do you have a more fine-tuned method?
So my process for writing blogs, we're kind of new to it. Like I've written blog posts before, but not in like a business context. So I always start with our main goal. Like, what is our goal with our blog? One is obviously we want some SEO impact, but two, we also want to create genuinely interesting and thought-provoking content. I think that is the biggest kind of differentiator we can have versus 100 other companies doing AI generated content. So we do think of our topics ourselves. I don't think AI is necessarily very good at giving me ideas for blog posts that are genuinely interesting. So we do our brainstorming ourselves. We do our research using some AI tools to help us like kind of parse through a bunch of content at once and find the relevant statistics. A really good one to try out if you haven't is Perplexity. Super awesome search tool that's kind of AI first. Once we have collected some insights, I will put together an outline basically with all of the key points in the order I want to touch on them. I might pass them through an AI to get a first draft, but very often it sounds too generic and mechanical and AI written, even with me providing like fine-tuning examples. So I do end up going back in and rewriting a lot of the content to sound more like me and inject some more emotion and voice into it. Because I think, at least for our particular use case, that's very important. I don't think that's like the perfect process for everybody, but that's how it works for us. It is human driven at the moment.
Okay. We have another question from Clifford. Will there come a time when I can input all my past memos, emails, communications, and fine-tune/teach generic AI to sound like me? Is that possible now? And is that financially feasible?
It is possible. I think technically there's not a huge limitation to this. As long as models keep improving and getting smaller, I think it becomes more and more reasonable to expect this type of product, 5 years from now. But right now it's very difficult for a few reasons. One is like when I mentioned in the fine tuning example, you need to collect like end to end examples that show both the thought process and like reasoning process to help you get to the output, so that when you're in a different situation, the model understands how to approach the task. So collecting those examples is like ridiculously hard, even for like doing it broadly for a business, like doing it on an individual by individual basis. It's very hard. So I don't want to say it's technically or financially impossible, because I think that won't be the case in a few years. But in terms of like effort and difficulty, I don't think it's going to be worth it. AI models can learn to talk a little bit more like you from simple examples that you provide at runtime. And I think that's a more kind of like middle ground solution that will probably work better. But I totally agree. I would love a little AI clone that can do stuff for me when I'm feeling lazy. The other thing to think about is like, again, how am I going to review those outputs? Because I don't necessarily want to have emails being sent out without my review.
Really quickly before I add our next QA question, I'm going to make sure everyone has access to our survey. This survey is really important to us because we want to always be bringing you people like Ani to the DemoFest stage. So if you have a moment, please look at that, fill that out for us. It's really important. I just want to make sure everyone has access to the survey. We just sent it out. Ani, we're going to get right back into questions because we have the time. You mentioned human writers, and you were saying how human writers perform better, but how does that look when considering AI and human editing? That was asked by Sasha as well.
I think that's a good point. I think you want to augment the human writing process, and you don't want to automate it. Um, so, like, I guess to take it back to the basic issue, like, what is the issue with AI generated writing? I think one, people are starting to get better at detecting it, and people have a clear bias against it. Like, that's those numbers are hard to deny. So, what you really want to do with AI is speed up the process of the turning these bullet points into like a cohesive paragraph. I think when you bring the human back in the final step to turn that into a more human sounding, uh, emotion invoking type of a piece, that's where you get the actual benefits. I think at the end of the day, why do we want AI generated content? It's so we can get more SEO, create more content, thought leadership, and put it out there. But if it's not getting the clicks and you're getting downranked and things like that, you're really not going to benefit from it. So I think the role for AI and content generation is actually in the middle step. It's not in the brainstorming. It's not in the final output. It's in the middle step of taking your unique thought process and turning it into something that you can start editing. I think that's probably the best workflow at the moment.
Mark wants to know, how would you consider a RAG tool as a process of fine tuning when augmenting public models?
I think so. I think RAG is the best option right now for working with public models. RAG has so many benefits over fine tuning, it's hard to overstate them. It is infinitely cheaper, it's infinitely easier, and you can basically change the quality of your outputs without having to retrain the model. And training models is complex, and you need teams of experts to help you do it. So RAG, I think, is the best solution. And if there's one AI concept that you spend time diving into, I think RAG needs to be the one, because it is the way that these public models that are really good at reasoning and automating certain tasks, it's how you give them the information they need to do it well. And RAG can be honestly useful in so many different ways, whether it's searching over your meeting notes or your CRM or your emails, or giving your sales team answers to technical questions when they need them, instead of messaging a sales engineer or someone. There's tons of different use cases for this, and understanding that one technique, investing in the tools that enable RAG over your different data sources, I think will be one of the biggest unlocks for pretty much every team, every knowledge worker.
All right, we've entered the lightning zone. Braxton wants to know, have you found ways to tap into B2B data like Zoom Info, Sales Navigator, Apollo, etc., when you're using AI to augment research prep and prepare?
There are definitely ways to do it. There are specific tools that have integrations with, you know, lead generation or like prospecting tools. Again, the most important thing is exposing models to the tools that will give them information about a buyer, right? So in the concrete example of like I'm prospecting, having an AI tool that has access to LinkedIn and can somehow like get someone's profile and do some level of personalization or extract some information for you, I think that's probably super helpful when you're writing a personalized kind of like cold email or something like that. Well, again, to watch out for is that a good email at the end of the day, even if it's personalized? Does it sound like a human wrote it? I've seen a lot of cold outbound tools for automating campaigns and like scaling up email outreach or LinkedIn outreach with AI. All of them will promise essentially the same thing, which is if the person you're reaching out to has a LinkedIn profile or a blog post or something, the AI is going to read it and try and give you some like personalization to stick in that token in your email template. I think what we're seeing a lot of, and I don't know if this lines up with all of your experiences, but the effectiveness of those email campaigns, even if the volume goes up, isn't necessarily higher. I don't think the quality of the email is always improved, and I don't think the humanness of the email is necessarily improved. So definitely a minefield to watch out for. But there are tons of tools that integrate with LinkedIn and Sales Navigator, Apollo, these kinds of things.
And Ani, would you be willing to let me share my screen one more time? I have a few
Yes,
slides I
absolutely.
want to share with everyone. And give me one second. I mean, I'm just going to say I thank you for presenting with us. For those of you who are looking for more Demo Fest, we are on the road again for Demo Fest X. We were having an amazing time in San Francisco in February. We can't wait to bring the event to London and New York. So you can register for that at either these events or going to demofest.com. And we'd love to see you there. We also want to encourage you to stop by the expo hall and visit our premier partners for DemoFest. Since there was no transfer of money involved in this event, all of our partners have gone above and beyond to contribute to make this a success for you. And also a reminder, you're going to be pushed into your next session, and you're automatically going to go into your track, and you can switch at any point by toggling the agendas tab. Ani, I just want to thank you again for taking the time to bring your insights and knowledge to the DemoFest stage.
Thanks, Manny. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, man.
Of course. I'm assuming we're still live.
They got pushed to. There's
Okay, cool.
people watching. Most of them get pushed, but I appreciate this. This was awesome. So I can't wait to see if you can come to Demo Fest X, maybe New York. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, maybe. What did you think? I find it very hard to judge
I
reactions.
took some screenshots. I wanted to take some screenshots because that was awesome.
Cool.
Like there are very few in the AI space that are just as knowledgeable as you are, and so for you to give that kind of insight on something like this for free is huge. So I think that's going to translate to some following, where people are going to want to know what you think about these things. So, I mean,
Cool.
it's exciting. It was awesome.
Cool. And it was digestible.
Oh yeah. Oh,
give the same
you
talk.
took such complex things, and I mean, someone like me can understand. That means you killed it. You crushed it. So
Sweet.
awesome.
Good. Appreciate it, man. Yeah, I will. Unless there's anything else, I'll hop off the stage.
No, you're good. Take care, man. We'll talk later.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Have a good one.